light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. I very much do the work of a 21st century nun, but I do make extensive use of symbol and metaphor, creativity, being anomalous. I guess one of the strengths I have as Sister Who is that by being so different, I completely sidestep all of the usual expectations. As an autistic man, I am constantly wrestling with packages of expectations everywhere I go. The infamous, well, you don't look disabled or you don't look autistic, but because I look normal, I'm always expected to be normal. When I'm Sister Who, I don't look normal, and so I have the freedom to be truly and authentically and completely who I am, and to say the words that are in my heart without having to justify or explain them or fit them into some normal context. People say, what is normal? I say, well, it's a setting on the washing machine, but it's not a word that is effective to apply to people. If we say typical, then we are measuring only how most people behave, but then again, I'm not most people. So even in that sense, being Sister Who as a sacred clown allows me to sidestep the categories and address what needs to be addressed and draw attention to what needs more attention, to what's being ignored or overlooked or marginalized. And if it's a person, to validate that person by saying, hello, my name is Sister Who, what's your name, what's your story, what's your experience? I am eager to learn more about you. If you would prefer not to introduce yourself, I will respect that also. Is there anything I can do that would be genuinely helpful to you? Having numerous friends with various disabilities, it was a wonderful benefit in perception and relationship, because I was able to get in the habit of not only first saying, do you want help? And then of saying, how do you want to be helped? Because it frequently was not what I thought. What they needed was something different, because what they needed was something that would allow them to cope in the way that they were familiar with coping. If, for example, someone was colorblind and needed to know how is it color-coded. Once I know how it's color-coded, I can do it all myself. If someone needs to know, I'm hearing this and I'm hearing that, and the two don't seem to make much sense together, so how could that be explained? There was one crime-oriented television show that I saw once where a woman was interviewing a blind man who had witnessed an incident, and he was the only one who could tell what he heard, and he was absolutely certain about it, but it made no sense until they were able to gather all the other clues. And so then she brought him in and said, listen to this recording. And he says, well, you can listen to it also. And he says, yes, but we don't listen the way you do. You'll pick up nuances in the background that we're overlooking, and I need to know how you interpret this information. And so then it was animals. Okay, so we hear animals in the background. Is it like a farm? No, is it like this? No, it's like a zoo. Okay. They had no idea how a zoo would sound different. Being close to a zoo would sound different than being close to a farm. To them, it was simply animal noises. But to him, it also imparted a context. The thing with having these different perspectives and these different ways of being there for each other, I guess, and communicating, the ways that ultimately we wind up being, metaphorically one might say, guardian angels to each other. And I do not consider guardian angels to be purely a Christian suggestion. There's a sense in which divine intervention of some spiritual sort could be an element within so many different belief systems. Within neo-paganism, it might be receiving help from the fairies and elves and so forth. Also, the little people, as some sometimes term them, but little needs to be used as an objective term, not as a diminutive one. Do I really believe that there are? Well, I don't know, because I have no way of proving it one way or the other. But there's a lot of things. I started out talking about the using symbol and metaphor and how this all comes back to using imagination. And there are so many constructive ways of using imagination if we will give ourselves permission. At one time, there was a lot of jokes made about people who talk to themselves as if it was a symptom or a symptom of mental instability of some kind, and it really isn't. It could be equally simply an indication of having an imagination that is able to engage proactively in constructing solutions. Sometimes people now refer to it as thinking out loud. And thinking out loud is sometimes a way of talking with yourself, because you're weighing this thought against this one, against that one, and figuring out what solution is at the intersection of all three. And in a sense, they're all your own thought. But there was one of the episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine where it was presented as if it was inside someone's mind, and each different voice within the person's mind took a familiar face of someone who was also within the show. So it was as if one were using Grandma's voice to be the voice of wisdom and maturity, and a young cousin's voice to be the voice of innovation, and people whom one actually might know, who can then play the roles of saying these lines and these thoughts within their head. There was another author I read, I believe it was Barbara Scher, who suggested that if you've had a dysfunctional family, you can use your imagination and create the family you wish you would have had, and select celebrities from Hollywood or famous characters from movies or books, and to say, if I was going to have a grandparent, because maybe I never had the grandparent I needed, I would want my grandparent to be like this person in this story. Maybe I would want a grandparent who was Ebenezer Scrooge on December 26th, a grandparent who has an amazing understanding of the world of business and how treacherous and dishonest it can be, and yet the generosity and the love and the sense of renewal that Ebenezer Scrooge had on Christmas morning after the experience with the three spirits, and having refound the better parts of himself, granted at a very late age in life, but nonetheless he did find that better part of himself again, and was able to live a much more beautiful and empowered and blessed life from that point on, and be a blessing to the world around him. Using your imagination to say, okay, fine, I know this person is not my grandparent, I know this person is not my cousin, I know this person is not my father or my mother, but I think having that person or character as my father or mother, and imagining what it would be like, will empower me emotionally to heal from some of the wounds I experienced during the years I was growing up and during the times that were most difficult for me. If you were to imagine, if you were having a very difficult time in high school, for example, and if you were to imagine that Falkor from the movie The Never-Ending Story were invisibly walking right beside you, giving you advice, well, what would Falkor say? Within Christian circles during my teenage years, people would often use the trendy slogan, what would Jesus do? Well, and of course nobody really knows, and the depictions of Jesus that were presented to me during that time were a very broad spectrum. I mean, there really was no consensus about what Jesus would do or how he would behave or what he would say. Everybody had an opinion, and everybody was sure their opinion was the right one. And that's where, even now, it's kind of challenging to me when people say, do you believe in Jesus? And my first question is, and what exactly in practice does that mean? What would that look like? And once you give me your definition, I'm going to be using that definition to see whether you are acting like the Jesus that you recommend or that you describe. Or are you not doing what Jesus would do? I mean, if you give me a definition of believing in Jesus and you don't live according to that definition, then I would have to conclude that you don't believe in Jesus either. And if you don't believe in Jesus, then why are you asking me? And someone may insist, but I do believe in Jesus. Well, then why did you do this and this and this? And why did you ignore that person in trouble? And why did you say nothing when somebody made that really, really offensive joke in public? Does it really take that much of an effort to say, that's not appropriate? Whether it's me or somebody else or whoever it is, that joke is simply not appropriate. We need to find better ways of creating laughter among ourselves. A laughter that comes from genuine joy, not from putting somebody else down. To take a stand, I think it was one of the early presidents of the United States, Alexander Hamilton, who said, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. Looking in the mirror and figuring out who that person is, for what you would take a stand, whom you would defend, would you put your life on the line for anything at all? Is there any loved one who matters to you so much that if their welfare were threatened, you would step between them and the gun that is pointed at them and say, no, I will not allow you to kill this person. They mean too much to me. They mean more to me than my own life. And, but that brings us back to the question then, doesn't it? Does anything mean more to you than your own life? And in contemplating meaning and purpose and living with conviction and living with purpose, a number of years ago I came to the conclusion that if one is not living for something greater than oneself, life tends to take on, it's like your life becomes small and petty in its true proportions. And the people I knew who were living only for themselves, and when they ultimately died, it was like we're trying to have a memorial service and trying to show respect for this person who has died, and the standard social expression, have you no respect for the dead? Well, maybe in truth you don't, because that dead person was so narcissistic and selfish and greedy and they lived only for their own experience. Well, their own experience is done and over with, and the only thing that matters at this point is how to divide up the estate. And people like that seem to be forgotten very, very quickly, as if they really didn't, as if they didn't matter, as if it didn't matter at all that they were ever here. And so, to me, in order to give value to life, I have to find something bigger than myself, something outside myself to serve, something outside myself that matters. From one perspective, everyone matters, every person matters. But I need to focus that on the people around me, because if every person matters, I could say including me or even me, but the one thing I should never slip into saying is only me. When I was in graduate school, conversationally wrestling my way through all these complex debates about individuality and community, and finding that the graduate school I attended understood categories. I don't think they understood true community, but they understood categories, and they would speak about them as if they were community, which by their definitions they really weren't. And so I kept trying to figure out what is the explanation of this, and how do I fully understand individuality and community in a way that makes sense and that answers all concerns. And what I finally discovered, kind of like when I was a kid and people would give me something to fix because they couldn't understand it, and I would stare at it until I had mentally integrated and absorbed the reality of all the details. And once I understood all the details, I could immediately figure out how it worked and how the details had to fit together. Well, in a similar sort of way in graduate school, I discovered that, as I stared at this until I could see all the details, I discovered that there's no example of individuality that can exist without a constellation of supportive relationships. And it's totally unique, but it needs all these supportive relationships or it can't be there. Even the very first French fur trappers to journey into the far west during the 18th and 19th centuries were dependent upon a community of animals and plants and environmental conditions in order to survive. Otherwise they would starve to death or die of hypothermia or any number of other things. I mean, their own lives could not continue without this constellation of relationships. Relationships to nature, relationships to weather conditions, relationships to the Native Americans in the area, whether there was hostility or whether there was collaboration. How to address with respect when you didn't know the first word in their language, and how to figure out what constitutes respect and what constitutes a respectful expression to these people whom you've never met before and couldn't say a single word in their own in their native language. So individuality requires a constellation of relationships, and then I discovered there's a symbiotic relationship between community and individuality. Communities renew themselves by nurturing their individuals, no matter how eccentric those individuals may be. There was phenomenal leaps in understanding that were accomplished once the surrounding community started nurturing Albert Einstein instead of demanding that he fit in and saying, well, we really don't care about all your complex ideas, but we'll pay you a minimal living wage for being a janitor. Which to me is like, are you nuts? Albert Einstein? But of course they didn't know who Albert Einstein was because his genius had not been recognized or integrated at that point, and the community needed to stop ignoring him and start listening to him. And once they did that, all kinds of additional things and a whole new age of being came into manifested and came into everyone's lives. So communities renew themselves by nurturing their individuals, and individuals survive by contributing to their communities. And what positively amazed me as I pondered that for weeks and then months and even years now is that I have not been able to find a single problem in all of human history that cannot be explained as a breakdown of the symbiotic relationship between community and individuality. In every case, either an individual who for whatever reason is not being nurtured by community, or a community that for whatever reason is not receiving the contributions of that individual. That what the individual knows is somehow not making it to the community, and what the community can provide in support is somehow not making it to the individual. Which I guess if you wanted to oversimplify all of that, it would simply come down to the basic command of love one another, which is, I think, at the foundation of virtually every belief system one can name. That there has to be this love and respect and mutuality, mutual support, everyone taking care of everyone else while everyone else is taking care of oneself, and everyone gets taken care of, and it all works. But the more things become narcissistic, the essential story of Narcissus is that he was a youth that was so beautiful that he saw his reflection in a pool of water, and some texts say fell in love with it, or I don't know that it's genuine love though, but he became so transfixed, so mesmerized by his own reflection that he sat there staring at it until he literally died. And so when I was trying to figure out what is the signature quality of narcissism, the way I now describe it is to say that it is the negation of relationship. Because as Narcissus was staring at his reflection, yes, he was a very handsome youth, and staring at this reflection that he was so in awe of it because it was so beautiful. And I keep wondering, so at what point did he stop being beautiful and just get stuck in a rut? Because as he withered away and died, of course, he wouldn't be all that beautiful anymore. But I suppose if he died quickly enough, his beauty wouldn't fade as fast as his strength did, because he lost the ability to hold himself up. But it's the negation of relationship. He was not even in relationship with his true self. He was only in relationship with the reflection of his self. And when we take the reflection or the projection of ourselves and not the true essence of ourselves, and we think that that is ourselves, but it's not, we find ourselves drained of energy, drained of life, drained of the ability to contribute anything to the world around us or to receive anything from the world around us. It is not true relationship. It is a perception that stagnates and goes no further. And I've read in so many places that the primary evidence of life is growth. If you're not having ongoing growth, if you're not learning something and drawing something from what you're seeing and becoming a better person thereby, essentially you have stopped your growth. And when you stop your growth, you begin to die. And the body may continue to function for a while longer or go through its motions like an automaton or something. Or as one person put it, it's like when a car is dieseling. When there is a buildup of fuel in the engine and you turn the car off and the engine keeps running because it's using up all this leftover fuel in the engine, and the car isn't really going anywhere and it's not really running, it just hasn't finished using up its resources, kind of like Narcissus staring at that reflection. Until the body has finished using up its resources, it's there, but it's not living, and it's not engaged in growth, and it's not engaged in learning or becoming. All of those are the things that bring substance and importance and vitality to life. So when we become narcissistic, when anyone becomes narcissistic, and it's only about what they need and how they perceive and what they value, and there's a negation of relationship, the growth and the breathing, the inhale and exhale of the surrounding atmosphere, all of that is absolutely frozen in time and stops, and there is no life. And if there is no life, then linguistically we would describe that as death. And the thing that, at least within U.S. American culture, when something is dead, well, you cremate it or bury it or something. But you don't interact with it, you don't create a home for it, you don't have a relationship with it. You put closure on it. You put it where it needs to be because it has nothing more to do that has anything to do with ongoing life. And if one is going to be here, if I or you or anybody is going to be here, we need to be engaged in ongoing life. And I suppose in some ways it may sound to some people like I'm rambling and talking in circles, but it's because I find that life is a circle, but it's a relational, dynamic, moving circle. It's not a static circle that goes nowhere. And yet it's also kind of a closed circle because whatever is on Earth and is circling within Earth. And it's kind of like when people say throw things away. Where is away? Well, there is no away, it's just moving in circles. The Earth and its environment and its life forms recycling and recycling and recycling for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. And while all of that's going on, to also be learning and growing and becoming, so that each one of us can be more than just the sum of our parts. We are more than just our physicality because we have the consciousness, and the consciousness engages in language and perception and communication and collaboration, and all of those things make us more than merely the sum of our parts. And I guess if I were to wind up with a thought for this episode, I would want everyone to remember that sometimes our best resource is each other. And it starts with listening and hearing each other's stories and feeling with one another whenever an injustice is done, and feeling with each other enough to stand up and say, no, this is not acceptable, and this is not tolerable, and this is not the last word that I will tolerate. I'm once again brought back to that wonderful African word, Ubuntu. I am because we are, and we are because I am. There is no inherent conflict. There needs to be harmony. Thank you very much for watching. I hope some of the things I've said in the last half hour have been helpful, genuinely helpful and empowering to you.